And we're back on another episode of We Making It Woo! Remember that if you want to be a part of the conversation, please feel free to email me at katiesmiles.nyc. That's Katie, because it's my name. Smiles, because what? My smile is so cute, y'all. And NYC, because that's where we at. Okay, so what happened last night? Guys, I worked a lot, and then I got home and I realized I had to do some more work. So that's what I did last night. Shout out to Jasmine Hearn. Her newsletter went out last night, and shout out to all of the beautiful people like Gibney, because that's where I was. What am I reading? I'm not reading anything because for those of you who don't know, Emily was away on her O1 visa renewal, so I have just been meditating and not trying to lose my mind. But she secured her visa and is coming home tonight. I love you, girl. I'll see you tonight. So yes, and yes. So what is being made? So this coming Friday, March 21st, I believe it is. Don't quote me, but this coming Friday, GroundWorks DanceTheatre will be premiering their work at Gibney. And usually we always talk about like what people are making, how they're making it, how do they make it happen. But today, given the nature of the relationship between my two special guests, we are going to curve that conversation to really talk about how lineage and relationships foster community and how that community helps us define what making it looks like. When I started the podcast, it was really about making these ethereal or ephemeral concepts really tangible. And I think relationships and community and recycling resources is one of the best and easily made tangible things. So that is what we're talking about today. And here to talk to me about said special things, I have two special guests. Special guests, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Katie. I'm David Shimotakahara, and I'm the founding artistic and executive director of GroundWorks DanceTheatre, and we're based here in Cleveland, Ohio.
Hey now.
Hey, and I'm Amy Miller. I'm Senior Director of Gibney Dance Company here in NYC.
OMG. So if you follow me, you know that Amy and I have an outstanding relationship. I've been a stalker for quite some time. Yes, I said stalker. We took class together when I was 21, 2, maybe one of those. And she is amazing. And so she's been super. So, and of course, in the fact that she's been amazing, I always stalk her and say hi. And over time, those highs have created more conversation. She did a great episode with me on my web series, What's That Step? And so it's so great to have Amy, who is a little seedling, well, now big tree, that maybe was started with GroundWorks.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, Katie, for making space for this conversation. And,
Yeah.
I'm just so excited about what you're doing here
We're trying.
on the scene, bringing people together. Yeah. And I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome GroundWorks to New York City next weekend to premiere work and to showcase just the amazing amount of creativity and entrepreneurship that has been happening there for 20 years.
Yeah.
I really am forever indebted to Shimo, David Shimo, as a lot of us affectionately call you. And just thrilled at the full circle moment of coming back together as we have been over the years, but it just feels really tangible right now to be in each other's space in this way.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you guys met.
Shimo, do you want to tackle that one?
Wow. Well, we met both as performers with the then Ohio Ballet under the direction of Heinz Pohl. And Amy came to the company, I think you were 16.
Wow.
Is that possible?
Yeah.
Shimo, how old are you?
I'm not telling you.
Just thought I'd ask.
But no, she was just this sort of wonderkind kid that I immediately just was really, really attracted to her energy, her spirit, but this sort of amazing kind of intuitive physical intelligence that she had with her movement. And when I left Ohio Ballet to start GroundWorks back in 1998, I had it in my head to approach Amy and say, you know, Amy, this is something I'm really, you know, would love to have your collaboration and participation with, because I was so like turned on by the thought of being able to work intensively with her. Fortunately for the way things turned out, I think Amy was in a frame of mind where she accepted.
Yeah.
You know?
Amy, can you speak to maybe that energetic connection that you felt with Shimo?
Oh, absolutely. I think I felt a two peas in a pod sort of feeling. And, you know, looking back on it now, it seems even more special and even more rare and even more of just I can't believe that that Shimo took a chance on me that way, you know, to make space for a younger artist. He really brought me under his wing and in amazing ways that, you know, at this point now, being where I am in my career now, just the amount of energy that it must have taken for you, Shimo, to facilitate space for me, I think I'm becoming closer and closer to an awareness of just the enormity of making space to mentor and do things collaboratively as opposed to, oh, I'll just take care of this on my own. You know, like I think that's where I'm battling right now in my own career, is how to continue to work collaboratively even when things get, you know, the pace speeds up or there are opportunities that that start to layer on top of one another and prioritizing. And so Shimo, I guess this time has made me be grateful for that space. And I know you have continued to do that throughout your entire career. Even before GroundWorks, you were kind of innately just really mentoring and bringing people along with you in collaboration. So I know I absolutely learned that from you, and it's become the norm now. You know, like I'm always moving toward that, and I can feel myself when I pull away from it. I'm like, oh, we got to get back toward it.
Yeah. Shimo, can you speak? So as Amy and you were talking, it reminded me of this great conversation we had at ADF where we talked about the value of mentorship. Can you speak a little bit about the impetus that drives you to be in such collaboration and mentorship with both Amy and your artists? Because that isn't a default perspective to take given your position. So maybe what drives you to take that perspective?
Well, I think it's mostly necessity for me, because I learned pretty quickly that I couldn't do it all myself. To say, you know, I mean, and I think it keeps smacking me in the face, because I think all artists are entrepreneurs, and we're all really proud, and we sort of pride ourselves on our independence and our ability to get things done, and I'm certainly of that ilk. But you know, it comes a point where you realize that you know you really do have to rely on others, and so it's not a question of demanding it. It's a question. So how do I increase that resource pool?
Right.
How do I encourage that in ways that will help me, but obviously come full circle and make for just a very, very collaborative environment, because that's what you want. You want people to be able to give the best of themselves willingly, not because of their job or because, you know, it's some rule of responsibility. And I think the first place that I realized that was just in the actual creating of work. I just never felt that I wanted to be the sole creative voice in the room. Or, it wasn't like I was going to model the steps and make, make everybody move like I moved. I just felt that was a very limiting factor, although I trust my sensibility of movement, obviously,
right,
and rely on it. But, began to think pretty early on, gosh, I have all these movement specialists. I have these incredibly gifted, intelligent, creative people in the room. How do I work with that in a way that makes use of that?
Right.
Maximizes that.
Right. Right. I think Amy and I spoke to this in our first interview together about how do we honor the genius that's in the room. I think especially in my training, I was so afraid to maybe honor my genius because it didn't look like, my teacher's genius or the other person's genius. And I love that the process that you're speaking to is essentially like the lineage of that, or an example of that is in the interview that we did, where we talked about how do we honor the genius in the room, because that pushes the whole conversation forward. But in thinking about lineage, Shimo, where did you get this from? Did someone take you under their wing and do this for you, or did you have the opposite experience and you're like, I'm never doing that again?
I worked. I came up really through a lot of experiences working in ballet companies, and that is not the sort of the culture of creativity in most of those situations. It wasn't, at least at the time. So it was, I guess, Katie, it's funny, it was kind of in reaction to what I felt was some limiting factors in terms of my experience as a dancer, and sort of having to swallow a lot of my impulse and creativity in terms of what I could contribute. I felt. Having said that, it didn't hinder me at the time, but I thought really, in starting GroundWorks, not only was I interested in finding new ways of thinking about movement, but new ways of thinking about how to create that as well.
Right.
So,
I'd love for both you and Amy to maybe talk about some strategies you use literally in process to create space for those impulses to surface. What are some real games or prompts that you offer that allow people's voices to be at the forefront of the room?
I think that makes me think about evolution of the idea of yes and, when something is presented in a space, how can I say yes to it and then also take ownership of it and add on to it in some way? And I know that's at this point not an unusual sort of process within a dance studio or a creative process. And I love that more and more choreographers are moving toward this way of working, and I'm super interested in kind of the juxtaposition of a suggested phrase of movement or a suggested context and the genius in the room, as you say, and how those two ideas can come together and really catalyze some choices that wouldn't have happened without either part of that being there, right? That the structure is solid enough that there's a comfort level within the choice making, and then everybody feels like they can make a choice in a non-judgmental sort of way to get things going, and maybe it's version after version after version. I know. I think I learned this from Shimo, and early on, this idea of, well, let's just see what happens. Let's throw spaghetti on the wall and try some things, learn what we're going to learn, and then keep making new choices over and over, and it can build to a new thing. It also makes me think about too this idea of a first follower, which I'm not so crazy about that title, but I love the idea of it's maybe a tangible way of a yes and sort of thing. Someone, a facilitator, the entrepreneur, the innovator at the front of the room, or along the edge of the circle here, presents something, and everyone else finds a yes and to that. I consider those people first followers in some respect, that they've said, okay, let's go for this, because there are probably many other people along that circle who are reluctant to join for some reason and maybe haven't used their voice in a way.
Right.
So I think the power of that first person or that first group that goes, okay, there's something valid here, let's see where it can go. Yeah. And then the way that can engender greater space for other voices to come in too.
Yeah. What about you, Shimo?
Well, I'm thinking, you asked, relative to strategy, and my mind immediately goes to sort of like, how do you work with this through an organizational model?
Right.
And it's hard, I think we're all like, dance is steeped in sort of these traditional roles. And as dancers, it's sort of you're used to not leading, you're used to following,
right?
Not in the context that Amy just mentioned, but just really being, kind of directed. And and I think believe me, I haven't solved it entirely. But like, sort of, how do you like really create a structure within how the company operates, so that the dancers take an active role, not just as co-creators, but really kind of in the development of how programming works, and they take a more vested interest in sort of the development of the organization, and it's not. As I said, I don't have all the answers. But like, I think it's really important to like, if you're encouraging or trying to inspire people to take more responsibility in their role, you have to back that up somehow. They have to be, to ask for them to invest the additional energy, time, thought. They have to feel somehow that it's truly worth that for them. Right. And so that gets very tricky, sort of in terms of how things actually work, and you're trying to develop programming, you're trying to make this entity viable,
right?
Financially, how does that all work?
Right. Because you got a lot of cooks in the kitchen. You got to make sure y'all all making the same dish, because you got one person making hot dogs and the other person making spaghetti. Somebody's going to go hungry or unhappily fed. And I think we all want to be fed happily. But I also want to speak a bit about going back a bit to Amy's point about the one follower. I just have to shout out to like Amy and just so many people. I tend to be so as a dancer, I would say that I'm a bit more hesitant to be forthcoming and like hold my stakes. But it's almost like as soon as I take a step out of the dance room, I'm like, oh, I have these ideas and I'm gonna do this and this and this. But that same hesitancy kind of like is like a through line. And so I remember when I was making the web series, or even when I was like dreaming of the web series, I told Amy, I was like, Amy, I'm really having this idea about like conversations and like, oh, what does it mean to take class? And Amy was so supportive. And like, in some ways, she was that like first following that I needed, because I think sometimes too, as a dancer and as a person, you may have these ideas about developing something or creating this structure that you think people can benefit from, but you're like really nervous, like, oh my God, this could like totally be terrible and nobody loves it. But if you don't do it, right, like if you don't make the thing, you can't learn from the thing to maybe build the thing you're supposed to be building. So I just want to say that I appreciate everybody who's always down for my shenanigans.
Cheers.
Because I really think that's one of the beautiful aspects. I mean, no, I don't think anybody has it figured out, but I think one of the greatest highlights of the culture that you guys are referring to is that people feel empowered to make a choice. And then in making choices, I think there's like a pride and there's a sense of ownership and power. And I think when those ingredients are in the pot, whatever you make is going to be beautiful, right? Because people are coming from a place of abundance, and I can versus I can't. That yes and is already like, it's like the flour of the cake rather than the berries of the cake.
Yeah. Oh, nice. And maybe too that we all can, it's not either or, it's a both and. Yeah.
And I think that's a perfect segue to what have been some like highlights of you guys' relationship, given that you've worked together. Guys, they've worked together for 20 years. I just want to be clear about my age. I am only 25. So they've been knowing each other longer probably than I've been alive. But I think when you have such I want to go back a bit to go forward. One of the things that I thought about when I was making the podcast is that I didn't see success at 20 or 25. And I think it just looks different at 20 and 25. And so I bring up you guys' wealth of knowledge and years to speak to what can happen over 20 years. So tell me what happens. What have been some beautiful nuggets of this mentorship and lineage that you guys have created?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a big question. It's okay. Take your time.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, it's 20th anniversary of the company, and you really start to think back, on some of those like formative moments, and I really miss. I don't miss performing, but I do miss these moments in the studio that, and it wasn't exclusively with me and Amy, but certainly when we danced together, I miss that kind of physical connection, this really, really satisfying, deep physical connection that you really are communicating in this way that there just aren't words to really describe how that happens. But you're reading each other's intuition, and then that, I think anybody that's creating understands that it's a really heightened awareness, just this heightened level of being and experiencing I miss that. I miss that part of it, being in the studio at that level. I've had that with a few other dancer collaborators, but not many. I think at the level I think that I was able to connect with Amy. So that's one of the highlights. There's another highlight. I just remember when we first started, trying to figure out, okay, so we're supposed to do like community outreach. We're supposed to do something else with our work other than create work and perform it. And we were trying to figure out what it would look like, how it would feel, what it would be. And we just, we had no idea kind of how to communicate our work, our process, in a way that would make sense to populations, and in this case, it was kids in schools who had no background, no experience really with dance, let alone sort of concert dance / contemporary dance in the context that we were working with. So like that process was really just like taking it apart, piece by piece, figuring it out, and finding out what would work, and finding out what really, got people's attention, what stuck. And it was so, I remember there's like, we'd come back from these sessions sometimes just completely freaked out because, been like just utter, like kids on the walls. And then sometimes we'd come back and we had something where they were just like in our like putty. They were just so receptive and so tuned in, and we felt, oh my goodness, we made such a difference. Those kind of moments were terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. It's making me think too about one of the thanks for that, Shimo. Wow. It's making me think about one of the first performances, I think, of GroundWorks was in what's called the Ice House in Akron, Ohio, which big 55-foot brick building where chunks of ice from the lake were, before refrigeration, people would go there to get chunks of ice to put into their ice boxes.
Girl.
Yeah. I mean, so it's a very it's a really
industrial cathedral, we called it.
There it is. Yeah. And befriended the owner and started, Shimo's like, let's turn it into a performance space. As Shimo had been doing, and we had been doing in churches and museums, and really taking dance beyond the proscenium. And so here's this beautiful industrial cathedral, and Shimo created a 20-minute solo for himself and a 20-minute solo for me, and that was the first show. Was we set up a Marley and solos back to back, and we finished that performance, and I was just so elated. I think at that point I still only thought of performance as the final product of dance, and I just remember Shimo we like turned to each other. I don't know if it was a specific moment, but I left that experience with this idea of that's just one facet of the work. We just did that show. Great. That felt amazing. Wow. So there's so much more work to be done. Yeah. And I think that shifted my scale of work. Yeah. And that building the company in all of its facets, and building an awareness for dance, and taking dance outside the proscenium, and all of that was the work. All of that was the choreography, and we got to do all of that together, and to bring in new collaborators along that. So there was something special about that Ice House moment, the 55-foot ceilings, and the rain dripping in occasionally, and just all of those variables. But this idea of extending the work.
Yeah, and I love that. As Shimo was talking, I was like taken aback to Lake Country for some reason, but just what does it mean to read someone's intuition? They Oprah calls it, I think, like the aha moment. Some people call it like the high vibration moments, for those moments where it's in between thought. And I think that all of those memories that you have spoken to, be it the crazy kids, time when they're on your side, or that moment when you're in the studio and like you are really synced in a way that language hasn't quite been able to articulate. Hence why we have so many ways to explain it. And I think that's so amazing. But one other thing that you guys talked about too is this like resurging of energy. So you take this one ice house and you make it a theater space, and then that energy is transformed into you having this feeling of like, oh, and we're not even done yet. There's so much more. Can you talk a bit more about how you guys' relationship has been able to offer just more moments of that resurgence of energy?
Like, one of the things that happened to me, I'd say, after the first 10 years, was it was like, okay, we had dedicated ourselves to trying to innovate artistically, and we had this great platform, this great vehicle to do that with, and we were doing kick-ass performances, and sort of it really started to make sense to me, like that in and of itself was certainly would always be central and core to the organization, the company, the mission, but like, what else? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing the performances for ultimately? Like, what is there something else that needs to come out of this? And I think I thought of that relative to sort of the investment of our community in sort of this entity, this idea that we had started, like, and it really, like, became for me almost like this sort of resurgent. You talk about like finding new energy.
Right.
For me, that was the kick in the ass moment, which is like, okay, but like, how do we use that in new and interesting ways?
Yeah.
That doesn't compromise the artistry,
Mm-hmm.
but feeds the artistry
Right.
in these different and interesting ways. And I know when Amy left to go to New York, and I know that she was searching for, I think, in a similar way, for something that she could bite into.
Right.
And really,
Right.
I don't know, Amy, you talk to that, but to me also, the reason that Amy and I have I feel continued to have a really vibrant and interesting relationship is, I think, because we're both working at this in our own ways,
Right.
and are finding new things.
Right.
Yeah.
Amy?
Absolutely. I kind of got lost on a train of memory. I'm having
Yeah, I love that. Right, like it's recalling and conjuring some things
what's
from.
coming through.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is just such a gift to take this hour out of our week to
That's why I
connect
love
and reminisce.
this job. Yes.
This is so special. Oh my gosh!
By far favorite job so far.
If the world did more time of self-reflection and synthesizing ideas, I think we'd be in a much better place.
I concur.
So thanks for the time to
Of course.
make space for this. I guess along those lines, or maybe off track. I've lost track at this point.
It's
but,
all good.
it makes me think about continuing to evolve a relationship or a connection to someone or something, and allowing it to shift over time, and to actually expecting that interests in the why will grow and evolve over the lifetime of a human and the lifetime of an idea. And I think I've really respected and have had such gratitude to Shimo to allow that to be part of the conversation, that
Right.
how we interacted or what we thought the why was 20 years ago. There's still an absolutely core essence of just a love of the art and a love of, I think, the power of dance in our world. But both of us, as you say, have continued to kind of chew on it in different ways, and keep coming back together and exchanging ideas about what we're noticing and what we're working with. And Shimo has continued to invite me back to choreograph with the beautiful dancers of GroundWorks, and that's been an ultimate gift. And what a beautiful laboratory and experiment, and again, a huge risk,
Right.
To make space for an emerging artist to experiment and try things out. And he's been doing that for me since 2005. So
Yeah.
just this lineage of continuing to develop things both on the stage and otherwise. I know recently when I came back to work with the company, our conversations have moved a lot toward engagement and community engagement and thinking about that. And I think those have been hugely instrumental conversations for me to hear about how Shimo, how you're chewing on that and what's important to you along those lines too. And so I'm just grateful for the exchange and the evolution of the relationship over time.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, too, what's comforting above all to hear is that both of you have made space for yourselves to allow shifts to happen. I think being 25 in New York City, a lot of things start to shift, and you really just want things to be still. Please, just be still. But the only thing that's the only thing that's constant is change, and how you guys' relationship is a reflection of that, how you guys' relationship has gave birth to that, and how you guys is in allowing that have been able to plant new trees in this larger forest of your relationship. #goals. So I think as we draw to a close, I would love for us to, the reason why, but I'm going to say what first. I would love for us to talk about the value of mentorship. In this great ADF conversation with, I believe, Jerry Houlihan and a really famous NYC writer whose name I am forgetting, they talked about millennials, which is including me. Yes, it is. And a lot of my listeners, they talked about how in some ways that's missing. It could be because of technology. It could be because of the more fast-paced nature. But the mentorship that you see over 20 years is not the same. People don't dance for a company for 7 years the way that they used to. Can you speak to maybe the breadth of that and how beneficial it's been for you, but how, and also maybe in its changing, there's some new things that have come up for you guys, because I know both of you are mentors, but you're also mentees. So if you could speak to that.
Yeah, that's I've been thinking a lot about that actually, Katie, and because I am in this incredibly privileged position to be able to facilitate in so many different ways, not individuals and ideas. I feel, it's something I take very seriously. I think I just remember when I was in my 20s, not being aware of certainly nothing coming close to the extent that you are, Katie, of that sort of relationship. That everything you're doing is built on some precedent, somebody else holding the space, making the opportunity available. And sort of like, I think it's so important for young artists to understand that very early, that it's not just them in the room, as much as that you have that drive, you need that ego, you need that sense of yourself in order to continue and push yourself forward. It's to understand that that's really, it's a joint effort from day one. It doesn't matter if it's your parents, it doesn't matter if it's your teachers, whoever opens doors in different ways. And so that's from, looking back and realizing how many times I just sort of ignored that. At the same time now, kind of like on the other side of that equation, realizing that it takes patience sometimes to mentor, because of that sort of lack of understanding or lack of perspective. That's all it is. It's not being able to see the horizon in the same way. and not seeing the cause and effect of why things happen the way they do sometimes.
Right.
And so, like, from my position is not to feel snubbed or hurt if I feel somebody's not really tuned in to that and being gracious or acknowledging the kinds of things that I feel I'm offering or facilitating. So it's a two-way street all the way along the way.
Yeah.
And it is a kind of this importance to like build this sense of trust is I think really at the core of it. And but that can't happen without it takes commitment on both sides.
Right.
And I think what you were referring to, Katie, the sort of the pace at which things are pushed along these days, the sense of like impermanence that the economics of the art form are creating really run counter to that, or could potentially run counter to that, and that people really are not taking the same kinds of making the same kinds of commitments, or it doesn't mean to say we can't, and I just think that is a really important thing to consider in this exchange that happens in a real sort of lasting collaborative relationship.
Right.
Thank you for that. I think it also makes me think about the idea of meeting each other halfway.
Right.
And oftentimes you'll go to a discussion and there'll be community agreements on the board ahead of time, and one of the community agreements that is said a lot is step forward, step back.
Right.
In reference to, if you hear yourself speaking a lot, step back and allow space for someone else to speak.
Right.
But I keep thinking about that community agreement in literally every interaction. Right. And how that can step forward, step back, step forward, step back.
Right.
And how that could be a dance.
Right. Bob and weave, bob and weave.
There it is. So whether it's we're making work together in the studio, we're stepping forward, stepping back, what that looks like in a conversation, what that looks like in a project development, what that looks like in a meeting.
Right.
So mentorship and menteeship and that exchange of stepping forward and stepping back and meeting each other halfway and continuing to negotiate what that third thing we're making together is, maybe come across this idea of the third culture. Instead of exchanging ideas, we actually create a third thing together that couldn't have been there before.
Instead of exchanging, let's create an idea.
That maybe maybe I'll just close by saying, as I get further away from performing on a physical stage in theater with my body through choreographic sorts of moves, stepping forward and back, I think I'm becoming more sensitive to that ebb and flow within daily interaction and other sorts of ways of making work. And so that meeting each other halfway and how it feels when we're doing anything together matters so much more to me than it ever did before.
Right.
As well.
Yes. And I want to close with two things. One is I too need patience because, with these interviews, I have time to prepare. I have time to kind of like just dream of maybe what's coming and like what I want to hear and what I want to be able to ask. So like I've meditated on being patient, but I can imagine to all of my mentors, I definitely see Amy as a mentor. Oh, I do not always have perspective. So I appreciate Amy and Nigel Campbell and Chanel and Miss Lasea and Miss Kay from English class and senior English class in high school. Y'all, I am a lot and I have a lot of ideas, and I'm so grateful that someone was my mom.
Shout out to you, mama. I'm so grateful because I can think of many a times that I did not have perspective. And I'm grateful that someone just really stuck with me because I usually come to the other side. It just takes me a minute. So thank you to all those beautiful people out there who hold it down for me. And lastly, what I think I would love for people to take away, if nothing else, because there's so many beautiful things, is almost lineage and a recycling of resources as resistance. I'm going to reference Angie Pittman, whose interview was about quietness as a resistance. I think thinking about pace, thinking about time, how do we view relationships and lineage as a form of currency, as a bridge to abundance, as a bridge to having, so that we resist and reclaim and recreate what things can look like. What making it can look like. All puns intended.
Yes.
Before we get up out of here, let us announce the dates one more time and where people need to be for the show.
Great. We'll also be performing at Gibney Center on Friday, March 21st and Saturday, March 22nd. Both shows start at 7 o'clock. Is that right, Amy?
I think we're at a 7:30 start time.
7:30. Okay.
Right on. Yeah.
Yes, come to the downtown location, not the uptown location. I always try to preface that. That's the one on 53A Chambers, not the one on 890 Broadway. If you have me on social media, just reach out to me and I'll give you some details. And I'm super excited. Oh, and lastly, but certainly not least, thank you guys for coming. And as always, 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 make it live, make it breathe. I think I'm going to say make it resist, make it redefined, but just make it. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Before we get up out of here, guys, I just want to shout out Mike Brunn, who composed my intro soundtrack. It is sang by Kuhu Verma. You can find them both